You are at your lowest point. You have lost everything. And the only person you can go to, well, they're the one that took it. Hi, my name is May Finch. I am an indie game developer, and I just launched a prototype for my next game called Ode. And it asks this very question. This game is a visual novel. The prototype is very short. It's only about 5 to 10 minutes to go through a playthrough. But as you're about to see, each playthrough can go one of 12 different ways. So I encourage playing through the game. It is available on itch.io. Before watching the rest of this video, I'm about to go into all the nuts and bolts. So to start, let me talk a little bit about the game engine that I use. I use Twine. It is a great game engine for visual novels, interactive fiction. I'm currently using the Sugarcube format for Twine 2.0, but there are a bunch of different formats and versions of Twine you can use. This is actually my first time using Sugarcube. All of my other games were made using Harlow formats. So it was a good opportunity for me to get used to this new format and also enjoy all of the additional opportunities for customization that Sugarcube offers compared to Harlow. So one small thing about Twine that I like is you can see the actual physical shape of your branching narrative story using its grid system. So let's click in to Ode. Ode's first name was Fate and Fury. That is now sort of the tagline for Ode, but it's remained as the file name for now. As you saw in that kind of big zoomed out mode, the structure of Ode is this huge set of 3 main branches. Those all combine down into this ending slash epilogue route. And as you might imagine, this means that the overall structure of these branches is a great divergence and convergence. Essentially, every branch has to make sense coming from a central starting point and then also coming to a central shared conclusion. So in Twine games, you will end up putting a lot of your little widgets and pieces of code that needs to trigger repeatedly in your passage footer or your passage header. So we're actually going to start with the passage footer. Anything that's going to happen as a result of a variable in your passage needs to go in the footer. That way it's called after your actual passage is called. So in my footer, I have things like my audio player. I have a reset for my click event capture. That way the click event tracking system gets reset before more clicks are taken. Here is where I outline all of my UI boxes. So you will see there is a box on desktop, there's a box on the far left. For the narrated text that comes in, there is a central container with your stats, and then there is a container on the right side of the screen that contains all of the options you have as a player. Now, I hadn't really made a setup like this before, so it was really interesting for me to go through and learn just some more basic HTML. The biggest thing is knowing how to use these containers to make grid layouts. I'll show my CSS in just a minute here on how I did that. But essentially, you can use containers and then items within those containers to identify clear columns and rows on a grid. And that makes your whole layout a lot more responsive than other ways of building it. Here in item 2 is our stat block. So for every stat, if you click it, it opens the same dialog pop-up, which kind of defines your stats and gives you a quick tooltip on how to actually use them. Down here, item 3, that is our option buttons, and you'll see this section is quite long. A few reasons for that include the fact that we need to have these data setters that let us know which option was actually clicked because we have certain variables that your choices will affect. We also need to have the ability to disable buttons. If there is an option you want to select, but you don't have the stats required for that, we need to disable the button so you know that option is there, but you also know that you cannot click it at this time. Another reason is that we only want buttons showing up if there is a relevant option for that button on the passage. What I mean by that is some passages only have a next button, some might only have 3 options, some might have 4. So we needed a way to make sure that there weren't blank buttons showing up if there was no available option for that button. And then the reason we have up to 7 buttons is because I also needed a way to quickly designate specific button numbers as, oh, if this button is clicked and this other variable is true, then we'll actually increase your stat for the relevant button number. But because I had to assign specific stats to specific button numbers, that meant that we had to do more numbers of buttons than we would actually use in a given passage. So let's look at the passage header now, where we'll see a bit more of how that works. So I basically took the options that were set in the previous passage and saved them to a new variable called last choice. I did that just to kind of reduce the opportunities for errors based on load speed and load time for the history passage being built. Down here, this is the widget I was talking about earlier that will increase stats based on clicking a specific button number. I capture the narration and choice history here. So in the game, you'll see a history pop-up dialog available on the main menu that just lets you kind of scroll back and see all of the narration that you've encountered so far, as well as which player options you've selected. This is currently a little bit buggy, so I do need to fix this system. It's one of the next things I'll be working on. But the way it's designed is that it will help you keep track of your decisions and paths and differentiate between different paths by being able to quickly scroll back and see, oh, what path am I on here? And here we have the standard resetting all variables to none or false that you need for a passage if you have variables that are going to be set to very specific things on that passage, and they need to be set to a none or false or null state before you get to the meat of the passage. So when you're using Twine, at least on the desktop, to get to the CSS, you have to go to the Story tab and then the Style sheet. I still have pretty messy CSS. I don't have nearly as many comments as I should on here. But, you know, learning and growing, it's a lot cleaner than it was on my first game. But I just wanted to highlight again how you can do a grid layout with containers and items. So you can lay out your grid template columns on your container as well as the grid template rows attribute. You want to set your display to grid as well. And then on individual items, you can designate which grid column they start at and which grid column they end at. You can do the same with the rows. There's a lot of good resources on W3 Schools if you want to learn more about doing that kind of a layout. The last thing I really wanted to highlight as something that I kind of learned how to do here that I was really excited about is transitions. So in most of my games, you will notice at least a little bit of a flicker between backgrounds when you're moving between passages that have different background images. And I hate that. But it has been very difficult in like the Harlow story format for me to come up with a way to make that a smooth transition. In Sugarcube, however, there is a way. If we go to our JavaScript, we can find this lovely little command. It's very simple. It is just config.passages.transitionOut. You can set it to whatever number you want. 500 works well for me. It's in milliseconds. It makes me mad that it's something I've been grappling with for so long has such a simple fix, because now just look at this. No flickering, all smooth. This animation is not something I could have done. Like, it would have wrecked the game pretty much with a flicker between each half-second long frame. Like, no, that would not have worked. I hand draw all of the art in this game using Procreate on my old cracked iPad. I actually only started really doing art in earnest about a year ago. I got a friend of mine who's a wonderful artist, Evan Stevenson, to give me a art class and teach me the basics. And it was super helpful. I definitely have a long way to go and grow with my art, but I'm at the point where I am comfortable drawing my own game assets, and that's exactly where I wanted to be a year ago. So I'm very happy to be at that point. My process is probably pretty similar to any other artist you would see out there. I do a quick sketch just to kind of lay out where I want all the objects in my scene and people and try to get, roughly accurate proportions. Then I go back in and I do a solid line work layer. This may actually be a couple of layers because, again, video game art, a bit different. I need to be able to quickly move different objects and people around the room, as well as reposition people around the room. This frame here is actually a great example because after you attack the Moirai, you beheaded her. So I had to animate her being beheaded, and obviously that held up arm falling to her lap. And that was a lot easier to do because I kept the drawing layers for her separate from the layers for the rest of the room. This scene was very fun to draw as well. People have called it moody, and that's exactly what I was going for. I wanted there to be this really kind of dark, striking scene as you start the game that introduces our player character's state of grief, as well as kind of indicating the state of the world is a little bit run down, a little bit forgotten. She's kneeling here at an altar to her god that has been covered in trinkets of the fates, the Moirai, because the gods are dead. And she kneels holding on to this basin that was once always set with an eternal flame and is now just filled with this ashy, crumbling charcoal. Plants are really hard to draw. I'm okay with how I ended up drawing them here, but I feel like that's something that if you follow my games over the next few years, you'll probably see change a lot in my art style because there are, I think, 100 different ways you could draw a leaf, much less a whole plant. Getting light right is the other thing that's very difficult, and I've gotten better at, but I still have some room to improve. It's especially important in a nighttime scene like this, and it's very interesting with digital art in particular, trying to use some of the special effects at your disposal to add Gaussian blur or a light color filter in a way that looks interesting and engaging, but still, translates well, if not, with perfect realism. It should at least indicate what you're looking at very clearly. And last but not least, I have to talk about the music. So, as you may have been able to tell from listening to the songs in the game, I use BeepBox for my music. I'm actually looking at moving over to Studio One and doing more composition with my keyboard for the rest of the game, but for a prototype like this, it made more sense just to quickly put some tracks together with BeepBox. I also weirdly find sometimes that I'm more creative on BeepBox than on a full DAW, just because the limitation forces me to be more creative in certain ways, and I'm not paralyzed by the number of choices that I have at my fingertips. In BeepBox, you can add basically different looping measures, and then you can assign that loop a number, and you can either repeat it on the next measure, or you can change it to a slightly different pattern of notes. It's set up in such a way that you can have 3 instruments and then some kind of a percussion line going at the same time, but you can actually add additional instruments. You can stretch out these measures like really far if you want. I usually only loop for, I want to say, between 16 and 20 measures for these small songs, but it's definitely a really powerful little music making site, and I really like to highlight it as such a great free resource for the game development community. A couple other tools I really highly recommend if you are making a Twine game. One is GitHub, or just some kind of a versioning and source control system. I love Twine. It autosaves. It doesn't always autosave. And if you ever want to go back to a version that you made like a few weeks ago, it's really important to have some kind of a version control system in place. I was able to do that really easily through GitHub, basically just setting up a repository folder backed up to GitHub on my desktop and then saving my Twine file to that folder. And it's given me the ability to roll back changes really easily, and just a lot of peace of mind in knowing that if I change something drastically, I can go back to that earlier version and restore from there. Another one is Canva. I actually made my first game entirely from non-AI. Importantly, please do not use AI for any game artwork. Assets from Canva. So my first video game was all clip art, essentially, but I still use Canva to help me quickly adjust the layout of my own art and to quickly make little graphics for social media promoting it. Now, we get to the launch and release of my prototype, which will someday be a whole video on its own. It was both really good and really terrible. I had the really good opportunity to demo my game in front of a whole crowd of people. I'd been involved in a program called The Artist's Way, and we had our showcase event last week with dozens of people performing anything from poetry to live music to myself with my video game. And it was an unreal experience to be in a room full of people all engaging with my game and playing this choose your own adventure together as a group. If you ever have the opportunity, or even if you don't make that opportunity, it is so valuable and so affirming as a creative person to see a whole room vibing with you and excited to see what comes next in your game. And then there's itch.io. So I published this game, just like all my other games, on itch.io. It is known as a great place to list your game if you're a small, new indie developer like myself, especially if you are sharing a prototype for a larger game. I've had no issues putting my other games out there. This game, like thematically, artistically, is pretty consistent with the other things that I've put out there. I think it's the best thing that I've made yet, actually, and its quality is a lot higher than the other games I put out. But something new happened with this one. Go over to our little search bar here. Well, that's odd. Where's my game? It's not indexed. So again, I will make a whole video about this at some point when I'm less salty about it, because I want to look at it more objectively and less emotionally. But yeah, itch.io did not automatically index my game when it was published, which means something in my game was flagged for review. I still don't know what that is. This happens a lot more actually to adult and not safe for work games, which is a shame. I think we all have a right to put out the games that we work on and have people be able to find them when they're searching for them directly by name, and for people to be able to find them on specific category pages. But alas, not me. It's been a week since I published. It's still not indexed. I have made a bunch of noise with itch to almost no response, and myself and everyone else in this boat just has to wait possibly weeks to months more. But you can still play it. You just have to go directly to my game profile or directly to the Ode game page, which I will make sure is linked in as many places as possible. So if you have the opportunity for 10 minutes and you really want to play a new choose your own adventure game, please go check out Ode Prototype. Again, I will be posting updates on the full game development to this channel pretty regularly, and I hope that you follow along here. I'm also on Blue Sky and Instagram at May the Finch, and I hope you'll have fun and take care of each other out there.